Some killers explode with rage. Jeffrey Dahmer did something far worse. He made silence terrifying. Jeffrey Dahmer was the kind of child people forget until they remember something strange. Not loud, not violent, not dramatic, just quiet in a way that makes a room feel colder when he leaves. He grew up in Bath, Ohio, tucked into a neighborhood where the lawns were trimmed and the air always smelled like something being watered. His father was a chemist. His mother struggled with mental illness. Their house had clean floors, locked cabinets, and long stretches of silence that were never truly peaceful. There were cracks no one patched, moments no one noticed. By the time he was 4, Jeffrey had undergone double hernia surgery, and his personality changed. He went from curious to withdrawn. His eyes stopped tracking people. He stared too long at things other kids looked away from. Animals, especially. Birds, frogs, squirrels. Not to name them or pet them, but to know what was inside. He started collecting bones. Not for fun, but for something deeper. Something compulsive. He liked the clatter they made, the way they felt in his hands after the skin was gone. He kept roadkill in the woods behind his house, dissolved carcasses in bleach, watched insects work. None of it was shared, none of it confessed. It was ritual in secret. His father once found a coffee can of bones and explained how to use acid to clean them, thinking it was science. Thinking it was bonding. But it was a different kind of chemistry. One not measured in flasks or formulas, but in what it meant to hold death in your hands and feel calm. At school, Jeffrey blended into the wallpaper, not bullied, not adored. He developed a fake twitch to get attention, barked like a dog in class for laughs, but his humor was hollow, a mask with nothing behind it. He drank in secret. Vodka in a Coke can, rum in his locker. Not to party, but to disappear. By 16, he was an alcoholic. He'd stare at the torsos of boys in the locker room and imagine them dead, not just because he was attracted to them, but because the idea of them motionless was the only version that didn't leave him. Stillness became obsession. Control became fantasy. No one noticed. Or if they did, they chalked it up to teenage weirdness. After all, he wasn't violent. He didn't lash out. He just drifted, eyes too empty for his age. In the basement of their home, there was a crawl space where he kept his jars. Acid, bones, things he didn't talk about. When the family moved, he brought some of them with him. When his parents divorced, he was left alone in the house for weeks. No one checked. No one asked. And in that silence, the last layer of hesitation peeled away. Because in 1978, just after graduation, Jeffrey Dahmer picked up a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks. They drank together, talked about girls, laughed. And when Hicks tried to leave, Dahmer panicked. He didn't scream, didn't threaten. He picked up a dumbbell and crushed the back of his skull. Then he sat beside the body for hours. Then he dismembered it. Then he buried it in shallow soil behind the house. And when he wasn't sure it was deep enough, he came back with bleach. And when he wasn't sure that was enough, he returned months later, unearthed the bones, crushed them with a sledgehammer, and scattered the pieces across a ravine. No one suspected him. No one asked questions. Hicks was just a missing name, one of many. But something irreversible had shifted, because Dahmer didn't feel guilt. He felt calm, and when the calm wore off, he felt hungry again. He'd spend nearly a decade trying to hold it back, failing, slowly unraveling in libraries, bathhouses, and dorm rooms, where the silence inside him grew louder than ever. The boy from Bath, Ohio, had stepped into the quiet, found it was shaped like him. After Stephen Hicks, Jeffrey Dahmer became something else. Not just a killer, but a container of pressure. In the weeks that followed the murder, he returned to the site again and again, not out of guilt, but to make sure the pieces of the body had truly vanished. He knew how deeply the secret had settled into his skin. But strangely, he didn't kill again for nearly a decade. Some say it was fear, others say it was opportunity. But the truth may be simpler. The hunger hadn't fully formed. He tried to live normally. Briefly enrolled at Ohio State University but failed out quickly. He enlisted in the U.S. Army in 1979, trained as a medic, and was stationed in Germany. His roommates would later report strange smells, erratic drinking, and a disturbing intensity in the way Dahmer stared. But there were no assaults, no victims, just a slow leak of control. In 1981, after 2 years of poor performance and alcohol issues, he was discharged. Honorably, without anyone truly understanding what they were sending back into civilian life. He drifted, Florida, then back to Ohio, then finally to Milwaukee, where his grandmother allowed him to live in her home. He promised to get sober. He didn't. The basement became his hiding place again. And though he didn't kill, he began experimenting, drugging men in bathhouses, touching them once they were unconscious, always under the radar, always gone before police could make charges stick. In 1986, he was arrested for masturbating in front of 2 boys. He claimed he was urinating, got probation, mandatory counseling. But the core of him remained untouched, the part that had learned how to slip through silence, how to appear ordinary while carrying something monstrous in his coat. By 1987, the mask began to crack. His urges weren't fantasies anymore. They were necessities. And in November of that year, it snapped. Dahmer met Stephen Tuomi at a bar, took him to a hotel room, and woke the next morning with bruised knuckles, blood on his hands, and Tuomi dead beneath him. He claimed he had no memory of killing him, but what he did next showed complete control. He purchased a large suitcase, stuffed the body inside, wheeled it past the front desk, and transported it to his grandmother's basement. There, over the course of a week, he dissected Tuomi's body, removing flesh, bleaching bones, separating organs. He dissolved pieces in acid. He crushed the skull with a sledgehammer. He scattered what little remained in the trash. There was no evidence, no noise, no blood trail, just a man vanishing from the world, and another man becoming more comfortable with that kind of disappearance. Tuomi was victim number 2, but he was also the threshold. From here on, the kills would not be spaced by years. They would be months apart, then weeks, then days. The ritual had begun. And Dahmer had learned it was easier the second time. By the time 1988 rolled around, Jeffrey Dahmer's quiet years of restraint had unraveled. The dormant hunger he had kept bottled beneath layers of solitude, alcohol, and failed attempts at normalcy was awakening with a relentless patience. It wasn't violent explosions or sudden attacks. It was a creeping tide, a cold, measured insistence that began pulling him back to the edges of society where loneliness and vulnerability intersected. The bars, the bathhouses, the fleeting faces of men passing through Milwaukee became the backdrop for a grim and meticulous new chapter. Unlike his first impulsive act years earlier, this time Dahmer operated with a patient, practiced hand. He learned how to find those who would trust a smile, those who would accept a lift, a drink, a promise of companionship or cash. These men were often young. Many were minorities, some transient, all somehow on the margins where no one was watching too closely. The predatory stillness in his gaze was cold, almost clinical, as he built his way back into the dark spaces he knew best. Luring victims was no longer a matter of desperation, but of precision. He selected them carefully, understanding that control was the most crucial element of his ritual. It was not about the kill alone. It was about the moments before and after, the possession of a silence so absolute that the rest of the world could not touch it. When a man accepted his invitation to leave a bar or a club, it was the first step into a world where time slowed and boundaries dissolved. Inside his rented hotel rooms and later the Oxford apartments, Dahmer maintained an eerie calm. His victims were often sedated with drink or drugs, substances mixed with care so that they drifted into unconsciousness with little resistance. There was no struggle, no noise, no sudden violence that might alert a neighbor or passerby. In those quiet, dimly lit rooms, Dahmer's ritual began, methodical, detached and precise. Photographs became an obsession. As soon as a victim was unconscious or dead, Dahmer would position their body, taking Polaroid snapshots with a strange reverence. Each image was a frozen moment, a delicate, posed stillness that belied the horror it masked. The photos were kept meticulously, stacked in envelopes, catalogued like relics in a private museum of absence. These images served as a silent dialogue between Dahmer and the lives he had taken. An attempt to capture a fleeting eternity where no one else would remember. Beyond the camera lens, he dismembered the bodies with tools chosen not for speed or brutality, but for quiet efficiency. Knives, saws, and chemicals became his instruments of erasure. Flesh was carefully stripped away. Bones were bleached and saved. Organs were sometimes preserved in jars and occasionally consumed in private acts of cannibalism, not out of rage, but out of a distorted attempt at intimacy and permanence. Every act was cloaked in silence. No screams, no shouts, just the cold click of a camera shutter, the soft scrape of metal on skin, the whispered hiss of acid dissolving what remained. Neighbors noticed the smells. A sickly, sweet odor that sometimes seeped through the walls, drifting down the hallways and into the courtyard. Complaints were made, but the landlord dismissed them as spoiled food or faulty plumbing. Dahmer, always polite and unassuming, deflected questions with rehearsed explanations. "Just the fish I'm keeping in the tank," he said. Or, "Must be the trash day." No one ever pushed further. The invisibility he maintained was part of the ritual, blending so seamlessly into the fabric of the neighborhood that his monstrosity could unfold without interruption. This was not the rage-fueled rampage of a stereotypical killer, but a measured, chilling maintenance of a secret world. As the bodies accumulated, so too did the containers. Freezers packed with wrapped remains, acid barrels holding dissolving torsos, and drawers filled with carefully labeled bones created a labyrinth of death hidden beneath the surface of everyday life. Dahmer's apartment became a tomb where life was paused and controlled. He often spoke of his victims as companions, ghosts he could not bear to lose. He would lie beside them, sometimes hours after the act, speaking softly or simply staring into the stillness that he himself had created. The psychological weight of these moments is impossible to fathom, but for Dahmer, they were the fragile threads holding his fractured reality together. Throughout this time, police encounters were brief and ineffective. In 1988, Dahmer was arrested for indecent exposure, but his record remained light, and no one suspected the depths of his darkness. A pattern of missed warnings and unchecked suspicions allowed him to continue. His facade of normalcy and his careful avoidance of violent outbursts blinded those around him. He worked odd jobs, kept to himself, and maintained a quiet presence that went unnoticed in the bustle of city life. But inside, a calculated killer was refining his craft. This period culminated in the move to the Oxford apartments in 1990, where his most infamous acts would unfold. Apartment 213 was not just a residence, but a stage for his ritualized horrors, the place where silence became suffocating and time seemed to stop. The days leading up to his arrest were marked by a crescendo of activity as Dahmer's confidence grew and the boundaries between his hidden world and reality thinned dangerously. The final moments, the arrest and the unraveling of his carefully constructed life would shock a nation and redefine the understanding of evil lurking behind quiet doors. In the spring of 1990, Jeffrey Dahmer's life took on a new rhythm, one that was quiet on the surface but fracturing with dread underneath. The Oxford Apartments on North 25th Street became his domain, an unassuming place where silence reigned and the walls held secrets darker than most could imagine. The building itself was old, its bricks weathered by years of Milwaukee winters, the hallways dim and rarely trafficked. Neighbors seldom saw Dahmer, but when they did, he was polite, soft-spoken, and seemingly harmless. He paid rent on time, kept to himself, and never invited trouble. But inside apartment 213, a different story was unfolding. A story of absence, control, and the slow disintegration of humanity. Dahmer's days became marked by a meticulous pattern of behavior. He would frequent local bars and gay clubs, his pale face often unnoticed among the crowd. His approach was patient, his voice low and unthreatening, his smile a mask of warmth hiding a cold, calculating mind. He offered money, companionship, photographs, a semblance of friendship to those who were vulnerable, lonely, or seeking connection. Once he gained their trust, he would bring them back to the apartment, a place where the rest of the world faded away. Here, time slowed to a suffocating crawl, and the true nature of Dahmer's existence took shape. Inside the apartment, the air was thick with the scent of chemicals, bleach, formaldehyde, and something unplaceable that clung like a shadow. The furniture was sparse but functional: a table, a few chairs, a small television flickering silently in the corner. The walls bore faded posters and photographs, some of landscapes, others disturbingly clinical images of human anatomy, hinting at Dahmer's fascination with the human body in its most raw form. The kitchen fridge hummed constantly, but it wasn't food that filled it. Wrapped packages, carefully labeled and stored in plastic containers, lay hidden among the condiments and leftovers. The freezer held even darker secrets. Containers of unidentified contents, frozen and silent, waiting in the cold to be dealt with in the coldest of ways. Neighbors occasionally noticed a strange odor wafting through the cracks of the hallway door, a sickly, sweet smell that was neither garbage nor rot, but something more insidious, more clinical. Complaints were made to the building manager, but Dahmer was quick with explanations. Fish from his aquarium, spoiled food, a faulty drain. His polite demeanor and the absence of visible evidence kept suspicion at bay. Residents who crossed paths with him found him unobtrusive, sometimes even helpful, and no one expected the horrors concealed behind that modest door. Over time, Dahmer's methods grew more sophisticated. He experimented with ways to preserve his victims, to keep them in stasis. He soaked bones in bleach until they gleamed pale and clean. He used acid in barrels to dissolve flesh with a chemical precision that spoke of careful planning. The photographs he took were not only for memory but also for control, a way to hold on to life by freezing it in images, an attempt to impose order on chaos. His apartment was both a sanctuary and a prison. A place where the boundaries between life and death blurred into a terrifying stillness. Despite the mounting evidence hidden within the walls, the wider world remained unaware. Police investigations into missing persons rarely connected the dots, hampered by the lack of bodies, the absence of witnesses, and Dahmer's ability to manipulate perception. His clean records and unassuming presence meant that every door knocked on came back empty. Every lead faded into silence. The building's creaky floors masked the whispers of a nightmare that had no voice. The crescendo came in the summer of 1991. The routine, once carefully maintained, began to fray at the edges. A young man escaped the apartment in a panic, naked and bleeding, only to be returned by police who accepted Dahmer's calm explanations. The incident went uninvestigated, a tragic oversight that would haunt the community forever. Just weeks later, the police would return, summoned by a different cry for help, one that finally pierced the silence. The discovery inside apartment 213 shattered the fragile normalcy of the neighborhood. What the officers found defied comprehension, a collection of human remains meticulously preserved and stored. Photographs chronicling atrocities, and a man who confessed to 17 murders without remorse or hesitation. The world recoiled. The walls that had held years of secrets crumbled. Milwaukee's quiet streets echoed with disbelief. And the apartment that had been a tomb for so long was finally emptied, its dark legacy sealed forever beneath rubble and silence. When the police arrived at apartment 213 on July 22, 1991, they expected to intervene in a possible assault. Tracy Edwards, the young man who had escaped the apartment's clutches, was visibly shaken and pleading for help. What followed was a sequence of events that would unravel a nightmare long hidden behind the quiet walls of a Milwaukee neighborhood. Officers Rolf Mueller and Joseph Gabrish were the first to step through the threshold, met by the unassuming figure of Jeffrey Dahmer, whose calm demeanor belied the horrors concealed within. The initial encounter was surreal. A man, polite and soft-spoken, standing barefoot in a room heavy with an undefinable scent. Then, as they moved deeper, the reality emerged piece by piece. A freezer containing a severed human head nestled among everyday groceries. A barrel filled with chemicals that distorted the very notion of time and decay. Drawers filled with photographs, documenting in cold clinical detail the dismemberment and preservation of victims. The officers were confronted not with a scene of frantic violence, but with a meticulously arranged gallery of death. Dahmer did not resist arrest. Instead, he offered a confession that was as detailed as it was chilling. Over the course of several weeks, his taped interviews provided a window into a mind both lucid and fractured. He spoke with an unsettling calm about the process of selecting victims, men often vulnerable and marginalized, picked for their youth, their loneliness, or their willingness to trust a stranger. He described the rituals he performed, the drugs administered to subdue, the moments of silence shared with bodies that no longer breathed, the photographs taken to capture a final stillness. Dahmer recounted the ways he experimented with preservation, from acid baths to bleaching bones, and how he sought to impose order on chaos through his meticulous cataloging. His voice was steady, lacking the remorse or anger one might expect. Instead, there was an eerie detachment, a clinical acceptance of his actions as inevitable. The impact on those involved in the investigation was profound. Officers who processed the scene required counseling. The psychological weight of the discovery left lasting scars. The media swarmed the story, gripping the nation with a tale of horror that challenged the limits of belief. Families of victims confronted a grim reality, their grief compounded by the public spectacle. Courtroom proceedings became a battleground between legal definitions of sanity and monstrosity. Dahmer's defense attorneys presented evidence of psychological disorders, while prosecutors emphasized his calculated planning and awareness of wrongdoing. The jury grappled with the unsettling question of how a man could carry out such acts without detection for over a decade. Throughout the trial, Dahmer maintained a composed exterior. He admitted guilt on all counts, but pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. Expert witnesses debated the nature of his mental state, highlighting the absence of hallucinations or delusions, yet acknowledging profound personality disorders and compulsions. The tension between the legal and psychological interpretations of his actions underscored the complexities of justice. Victims' families offered testimony that spoke not only to the loss, but to the betrayal of trust. How Dahmer had appeared ordinary, even kind, until the truth was revealed. The verdict, delivered in early 1992, found Dahmer sane and guilty on all counts, resulting in multiple life sentences totaling over 900 years. Dahmer's incarceration brought little solace. Isolated initially for his protection, he eventually requested placement in the general population. His behavior oscillated between compliance and unsettling displays, drawing macabre images, joking about his crimes, and engaging with fellow inmates in ways that revealed a fractured psyche. The prison system struggled to contain the paradox of a man both dangerous and vulnerable. In 1994, his life was violently ended by another inmate, a grim coda to a life marked by death and silence. The story of Jeffrey Dahmer remains a haunting reflection on the capacity for evil to lurk behind the most ordinary facades. It is a narrative not of screams and chaos, but of quiet, calculated destruction. A reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters do not announce themselves. They wait, they watch, and they disappear without a sound. When the officers arrived at apartment 213 on July 22, 1991, they did so expecting to intervene in a domestic disturbance or possible assault. A young man, Tracy Edwards, had escaped the apartment naked and disoriented, pleading for help. What the police found inside would shatter any expectation of normality or reason. Jeffrey Dahmer stood calmly, barefoot, polite, the very picture of an ordinary man. But the apartment told a different story, one of silence and death. The scent of chemicals, the hum of the freezer, the barrels of acid, all concealed horrors beyond imagination. The police opened drawers filled with photographs, images of men, their bodies displayed in lifeless poses, limbs arranged in unnatural ways. The freezer contained severed heads and packaged remains carefully wrapped and stored. A barrel held dissolving torsos in a chemical stew that time and decay could not explain. The officers, trained for violence and crime scenes, were overwhelmed. Many later sought counseling, unable to reconcile the chilling order with the monstrous content. Dahmer did not resist arrest. Over 6 weeks, his detailed confessions were recorded, revealing a mind both methodical and fractured. He described his pattern, choosing young men who were lonely or marginalized, luring them with promises of money or companionship. He detailed how he would sedate his victims, drugging them until they were pliable. Then came the strangulation, the moments spent beside them in silence, and the process of dismemberment. An act performed with clinical precision rather than rage. He spoke of the photographs as a means of control, capturing a frozen moment in time to hold on to a presence that death had stolen. Preservation was his obsession. Bleaching bones, soaking remains in acid, freezing parts to stave off decay. In his own words, he killed because he couldn't bear to be alone, seeking to possess a companionship that was forever silent. The psychological impact on those who investigated the case was profound. Officers who processed the scene found themselves haunted, with some unable to eat meat or sleep soundly. The media coverage was relentless, gripping a nation with a story that challenged the boundaries of belief and horror. Courtroom proceedings became a spectacle of human tragedy and legal complexity. Dahmer's defense team presented expert testimony suggesting mental illness, including necrophilia and psychosis, while prosecutors emphasized the deliberate nature of his crimes and his awareness of their wrongfulness. The jury was tasked with wrestling the uncomfortable question of sanity. Was this a man broken beyond repair, or a calculating monster? Throughout the trial, Dahmer appeared composed and quiet, acknowledging guilt but pleading insanity. The courtroom saw expert witnesses describe a personality marred by compulsions and detachment, yet without true psychosis or hallucinations. Families of the victims delivered testimony laced with grief and disbelief, expressing the profound betrayal felt when a man who seemed ordinary became a harbinger of terror. The verdict found Dahmer sane and guilty on all counts, resulting in a sentence of multiple consecutive life terms totaling nearly a millennium. Incarceration did not soften Dahmer's presence. Initially placed in protective custody, he later requested transfer to the general population, seeking some semblance of normalcy. His behavior was unpredictable, sometimes cooperative, sometimes disturbing. He drew macabre sketches, made dark jokes about his crimes, and maintained an unsettling aura that both fascinated and repelled inmates and guards alike. In 1994, his life ended violently when another inmate attacked him with a metal bar during a work detail. Dahmer's death was swift, but his legacy remained a grim chapter in American crime history. The site of apartment 213 was eventually demolished. Its lot remains vacant, a silent reminder of the darkness once housed within its walls. Tourists occasionally visit, drawn by morbid curiosity, but the neighborhood strives to move beyond the shadow of Dahmer's deeds. His story endures not merely as a record of horror, but as a stark warning about the quiet capacity for evil hidden beneath the surface of normalcy. The arrest of Jeffrey Dahmer sent shockwaves far beyond the walls of apartment 213. For the families of his victims, the discovery was both a horrifying confirmation and an unbearable new kind of grief. Years of unanswered questions were replaced by a brutal reality no one could escape. The quietness of the missing, the unexplained disappearances, the vague hopes for closure, all shattered beneath the weight of Dahmer's confessions and the evidence that no one could unsee. Each family member faced an agonizing paradox, mourning loved ones while confronting the grisly details that made those losses final. Some sought solace in legal proceedings, others in therapy, and many struggled to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the darkness that Dahmer embodied. The public's fascination was cold comfort for those left behind, a reminder that tragedy often becomes spectacle. Law enforcement and investigative teams were left grappling with the enormity of what had unfolded. For detectives and officers involved, the case was a crucible of trauma and professional challenge. Processing the crime scenes, handling the evidence, and interviewing Dahmer required emotional resilience beyond the ordinary. Many officers sought counseling as they wrestled with the images and stories that would haunt them for years. The task of piecing together the timeline of Dahmer's crimes revealed systemic failures and gaps in communication that allowed the murders to continue unchecked. Investigators faced harsh scrutiny and public criticism, prompting reviews of protocols, interagency collaboration, and missing persons reporting systems. The case became a catalyst for reform, though it could never undo the pain it exposed. Society at large was forced to confront uncomfortable truths about vulnerability, invisibility, and the masks of normalcy. Dahmer's ability to evade detection despite numerous encounters with law enforcement and the community highlighted the fragility of social safety nets. His victims, often young, marginalized men, were invisible in ways that made them easy targets. Discussions about race, sexuality, and societal neglect emerged alongside the horror, challenging communities to acknowledge the shadows in their midst. The media's relentless coverage both informed and sensationalized, sparking debates on ethics, privacy, and the boundaries of public curiosity. Yet, beneath the headlines and documentaries, a deep cultural unease lingered. How could such evil persist unnoticed? How many others remained hidden? In the years following Dahmer's death, his story continued to echo through popular culture, academic study, and public consciousness. Films, books, podcasts, and museum exhibits sought to understand the man and the monster, offering varying perspectives that ranged from forensic analysis to psychological exploration. These works attempted to humanize without excusing, to educate without exploiting, and to memorialize victims whose voices had been silenced. Each retelling reminded the world that behind every statistic was a human life, and behind every monster, a complex interplay of factors that defy simple answers. Dahmer's legacy became a somber lesson on the dangers of isolation, the need for vigilance, and the profound consequences of societal blindness. Despite the passage of time, the physical spaces connected to Dahmer's crimes retain a haunting presence. The site of apartment 213, now long demolished, remains an empty lot, a void where horror once lived. Neighbors who remain recall the unease, the strange odors, and the unsettling quiet. The stories circulate in whispers, reminders that evil does not always roar. Sometimes it lurks in silence. Visitors and true crime enthusiasts trek to Milwaukee, seeking to understand the darkness, but often leaving with more questions than answers. Memorials and vigils honor the victims, insisting on remembrance amid the shadow of forgetfulness. The community's resilience reflects a commitment to healing and to ensuring that such tragedies are neither ignored nor repeated. The psychological landscape shaped by Dahmer's crimes is one of complexity and contradiction. Experts continue to debate the nature of his pathology, whether his acts stemmed from psychosis, personality disorder, or a deeper sociopathic void. His own words, recorded in chilling interviews, reveal a man both self-aware and detached, capable of intellectual reasoning, yet devoid of empathy. This dichotomy challenges traditional understandings of criminality and mental illness, pushing researchers to reevaluate frameworks for diagnosis, prevention, and intervention. The case underscores the importance of early detection of deviant behavior and the risks posed by untreated psychological disturbances combined with social alienation. It remains a cornerstone study in forensic psychology curricula worldwide. On a broader scale, Dahmer's story has shaped public policy and awareness related to missing persons, victim advocacy, and law enforcement training. Advocacy groups have pushed for improved databases, better communication between jurisdictions, and more resources for marginalized communities vulnerable to violence. The intersectionality of Dahmer's victims' identities has informed efforts to address systemic biases that leave certain populations at greater risk. Educational programs aim to teach communities about recognizing signs of predatory behavior and the importance of listening to those who report concerns. The legacy of the case is a call to action, a mandate to transform horror into hope through vigilance, compassion, and justice. Yet, amidst the institutional responses and cultural reflections, the human cost remains irreparable. The families of Dahmer's victims carry scars unseen by the world, memories that refuse to fade. For many, justice through the legal system was only partial. No sentence can return a life lost or erase the trauma endured. Support networks continue to evolve, offering spaces for healing and remembrance. Survivors and advocates share stories to honor the lives behind the headlines, insisting that their loved ones be known not as statistics, but as individuals who mattered. Their voices challenge society to remember that every act of violence is a fracture in the fabric of humanity. In the end, the story of Jeffrey Dahmer is not just a tale of one man's descent into darkness. It is a mirror reflecting the vulnerabilities of society itself, the fractures that allow evil to fester unnoticed. It is a warning about the dangers of isolation, of invisibility, and of silence. it is a somber reminder that behind every door, behind every quiet smile, there may lie a story that refuses to be told. And it is a testament to the enduring need for empathy, vigilance, and justice in the face of unimaginable horror. For years, the dark thread woven by Jeffrey Dahmer through Milwaukee's streets remained frustratingly invisible to those who might have stopped it. His killings, spread over more than a decade, left a trail marked by subtle disappearances, whispered suspicions, and unheeded warnings. Clues scattered in plain sight but never pieced together in time. The story of Dahmer is as much a tale of his monstrous actions as it is of the systemic failures and social blind spots that allowed them to continue. To understand how such horror could thrive unnoticed requires stepping into the shadows of the community, the police department, and the very fabric of society that failed to recognize the signs. Many of Dahmer's victims were young men from marginalized groups, often minorities, often transient, many without strong family ties or social support. Their disappearances were not always reported immediately. Sometimes they vanished quietly, presumed to have moved away or fallen into trouble elsewhere. The racial and socioeconomic factors at play created a dangerous invisibility. Law enforcement, stretched thin and guided by limited resources, prioritized cases differently, often failing to link missing persons who fit a broader pattern. In several cases, officers encountered Dahmer directly, but these meetings never raised sufficient alarm. His ability to blend in, his polite demeanor, and the lack of overt violence in his public interactions created a veneer of normalcy that masked the horror beneath. A particularly haunting example occurred months before his arrest when two police officers responded to a call about a naked, bleeding young man outside Dahmer's apartment. The man was his victim, having escaped a brutal assault. When the officers questioned Dahmer, he spun a plausible story about the man being his lover and claimed the situation was a domestic dispute. The officers accepted this explanation without further investigation, returning the victim to Dahmer's custody, a decision that would prove fatal. This moment encapsulates the tragic consequences of assumptions and failures to probe deeper. The community's discomfort with addressing the vulnerabilities of its marginalized members allowed Dahmer to continue without interference. In other instances, Dahmer's encounters with law enforcement ended in release due to lack of evidence. Arrested for indecent exposure and drugging, he was often able to navigate legal loopholes, benefit from leniency, or exploit procedural oversights. His record, while peppered with minor offenses, never hinted at the scale of his crimes. This gap between behavior and consequence is a critical element in understanding how serial offenders evade capture. The fragmented nature of police records, the siloed jurisdictions, and the biases inherent in the system created a blind spot that Dahmer exploited with chilling efficiency. Community members also played unwitting roles in enabling Dahmer's prolonged spree. The tenants of the Oxford apartments complained repeatedly about strange odors and noises emanating from apartment 213. The scent was described as sickly sweet, chemical, and unsettling. Yet despite multiple complaints, landlords and building managers took minimal action. Dahmer's polite responses, blaming the smell on spoiled food or fish tanks, were accepted without much scrutiny. In this way, everyday interactions and social politeness became barriers to truth, shielding the darkness that lived behind the door. Beyond law enforcement and neighbors, the broader cultural context contributed to the invisibility of Dahmer's crimes. The stigmatization of homosexuality and the marginalization of minority communities created an environment where victims' disappearances were often dismissed or misunderstood. Media coverage at the time reflected this bias, sometimes minimizing the victims' identities or framing the story in sensationalized terms that obscured the human toll. The intersection of race, sexuality, and socioeconomic status played a silent but profound role in the delay of justice. It was only after the arrest, confession, and overwhelming evidence that the true pattern emerged, a chilling mosaic of loss and neglect. Investigators painstakingly connected the dots, reconstructing timelines, cross-referencing missing persons, and piecing together Dahmer's movements. The photographs, the preserved remains, the chemical containers, each a piece of a puzzle that spoke of premeditation, ritual, and the darkest corners of human obsession. For those who had watched the news, read the headlines, or listened to court testimony, the horror was in the details. For those who lived it, the horror was in the knowledge that it might have been stopped sooner. The lessons from Dahmer's case have echoed through law enforcement reforms, victim advocacy, and social awareness initiatives. The recognition of systemic failure led to improved communication between agencies, better tracking of missing persons, and a focus on vulnerable populations. Yet the shadow of those years lingers, a reminder that vigilance and empathy are crucial in preventing such tragedies. Dahmer's story is a cautionary tale, not just about a man who killed in silence, but about a society that allowed silence to be his accomplice. The courtroom was packed, but the air inside was heavy with something that no one could quite name. It wasn't just the gravity of the charges or the overwhelming evidence. It was a collective attempt to grasp a reality that felt impossibly distant. Jeffrey Dahmer sat quietly, his demeanor calm, eyes often lowered, his presence both chilling and strangely ordinary. The cameras flashed relentlessly, capturing every moment of a trial that had gripped the nation and exposed the darkest corners of human nature. The prosecution laid out the grim details with clinical precision, while the defense sought to paint a portrait of a man broken by illness, a soul lost between sanity and madness. The jurors listened with solemn faces, some holding back tears, others rigid with disbelief. Each piece of testimony added weight to the unbearable story. The victims, once young men with futures and families, reduced to images and statistics in the court's cold light. Families of the victims took the stand one by one, their voices shaking as they told stories of love, loss, and the irreplaceable absence left behind. Mothers spoke of sons who never returned from a night out. Brothers recounted last conversations cut tragically short, and friends shared memories that now carried the sting of finality. Their grief was raw and unfiltered, a stark contrast to Dahmer's composed silence. For many, the trial was both a trial of justice and a cruel reminder of the gaps left by years of unanswered questions. As the media broadcasted these moments, the public watched with a mixture of fascination, horror, and sorrow. Talk shows debated the nature of evil, newspapers printed graphic yet respectful accounts, and communities held vigils for lives stolen away. The trial was not just about a man, but about the collective reckoning with what could hide behind a smile and a locked door. Journalists documented every facet: the meticulous police work, the expert psychological evaluations, and the emotional outpourings. Books and documentaries would later analyze the case with varying perspectives, some focusing on Dahmer's pathology, others on systemic failures that allowed his spree to continue. Ethical debates emerged about the portrayal of victims and the risk of sensationalizing tragedy. Yet, amidst the media storm, there was a growing recognition of the victims as individuals, each deserving remembrance beyond their deaths. Memorials were organized, and families advocated for better protections for vulnerable populations. The trial became a catalyst for societal reflection on issues of race, sexuality, and mental health. Legal experts and psychologists dissected Dahmer's mind, exploring how a man with such calculated methods could also suffer from profound loneliness and detachment. The courtroom presentations delved into his history, the early signs of his compulsions, and the ways he sought control through ritualized killing and preservation. The jury faced the difficult task of weighing medical testimony against the undeniable facts of Dahmer's conscious decisions. The verdict, guilty on all counts and sane, was a moment of relief tempered by the somber reality of the lives lost. Sentencing was a procession of legal finality, yet it could never replace what had been taken. Public reaction was polarized. Some called for the harshest punishments available, while others wrestled with the complexities of mental illness and responsibility. The case sparked discussions on how society identifies and intervenes with potentially dangerous individuals. It revealed uncomfortable truths about how marginalized victims are often overlooked and how systemic failures contribute to prolonged tragedies. Communities began to push for reforms, hoping to prevent future horrors like those that unfolded behind Apartment 213's door. The trial's conclusion did not mark an end, but a beginning, a prolonged journey of healing, questioning, and vigilance. Families sought ways to honor their loved ones, while law enforcement agencies reassessed protocols and communication strategies. Educational programs emerged, emphasizing awareness and compassion for those on the fringes of society. The collective memory of Dahmer's crimes became a touchstone for discussions about evil, empathy, and the need for societal responsibility. As the media spotlight dimmed and the courtroom emptied, the echoes of the trial lingered. They served as a reminder that beneath the surface of everyday life, darkness can take root unnoticed. That silence can be complicit, and that the only way to honor those lost is through remembrance, understanding, and an unwavering commitment to justice. After the trial and sentencing, Jeffrey Dahmer was placed in the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin, a maximum security prison designed to hold some of the state's most dangerous offenders. Initially, Dahmer was housed in protective custody. The authorities recognized that his crimes and notoriety made him a target within the prison system, where inmates often sought retribution. In this isolation, Dahmer spent long hours alone, reflecting on the depths of his actions and the chasm between his past and present. Reports from staff indicated he exhibited moments of genuine remorse, attending religious services and engaging in discussions about faith and forgiveness. Yet, these glimpses of vulnerability were intertwined with episodes of disturbing behavior, sketching macabre images, making unsettling jokes about his crimes, and sometimes retreating into silence so deep it unnerved those around him. Despite warnings, Dahmer requested and was eventually transferred to the general population, seeking the social interactions and freedoms denied to him in isolation. This decision proved fateful. The dynamics of prison life placed him alongside men who harbored deep anger and resentment, not only towards him, but towards what he represented, the darkest extremes of human cruelty. Dahmer's presence sparked fear, hatred, and fascination in equal measure. Some inmates whispered of his past with revulsion. Others watched his every move, anticipating any sign of weakness. Guards observed his cautious navigation of prison politics, his efforts to fit in without drawing attention. He cleaned bathrooms, mopped floors, and participated in work details, maintaining a fragile balance between survival and vulnerability. On November 28, 1994, during a routine cleaning assignment in the prison gymnasium, Dahmer's fragile existence came to a brutal end. Inmate Christopher Scarver, reportedly motivated by anger over Dahmer's crimes and perceived behavior in prison, attacked him with a metal bar taken from the weight room. The assault was sudden and vicious, catching Dahmer and another inmate off guard. Dahmer sustained severe head injuries and was rushed to a nearby hospital. Despite medical efforts, he succumbed to his wounds within an hour. Scarver's actions shocked the prison system and the public alike, raising questions about inmate safety. the limits of punishment, and the cycles of violence that permeate the carceral world. News of Dahmer's death was met with a complex mixture of relief, sorrow, and lingering horror. Some expressed satisfaction that a man responsible for unimaginable atrocities would no longer pose a threat. Others mourned the abrupt end to a life steeped in darkness and the unanswered questions about what led to such a descent. Victims' families offered statements that ranged from cautious closure to renewed pain. The prison administration faced scrutiny over security failures that allowed such an attack. Media coverage revisited Dahmer's crimes, his trial, and the psychological complexities that made him both infamous and enigmatic. In the years following his death, Jeffrey Dahmer's story became a fixture in popular culture and criminological study. Documentaries, films, books, and podcasts sought to explore the nature of his pathology, the societal failures that enabled him, and the enduring impact on victims and communities. His life and crimes serve as a stark reminder of the potential for darkness within ordinary facades and the importance of vigilance, empathy, and justice. Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes left an indelible mark not only on the families of his victims and the Milwaukee community, but also on law enforcement agencies, mental health professionals, and the broader societal understanding of serial violence. The sheer scale and chilling nature of his actions exposed glaring gaps in the systems designed to protect the vulnerable and to identify threats before tragedy struck. In the wake of Dahmer's arrest and conviction, police departments nationwide revisited their approaches to missing persons cases, especially those involving marginalized populations who often slipped through the cracks due to systemic biases. The fragmentation of communication between agencies, the uneven attention given to cases depending on race, socioeconomic status, or sexual orientation were laid bare. Reforms aimed at enhancing interagency collaboration and creating centralized databases for missing persons and unsolved crimes became priorities, a direct response to the failures that had allowed Dahmer to operate undetected for so long. Beyond procedural changes, Dahmer's case galvanized victim advocacy groups who pushed for more comprehensive support for families of the missing and murdered and for more culturally sensitive approaches to communities at risk. The recognition that many of Dahmer's victims were from marginalized backgrounds highlighted the urgent need for equity in law enforcement responses and societal awareness. Organizations dedicated to protecting vulnerable populations increased their outreach, education, and resources, fostering dialogue about the intersections of race, sexuality, poverty, and violence. The narrative shifted to include voices that had long been sidelined, emphasizing that the tragedy of Dahmer's crimes was not only personal but also systemic. Memorials and public commemorations sought to humanize victims who had been reduced to statistics in media coverage, reclaiming their stories from the shadow of horror. Culturally, Dahmer's story has permeated popular media, inspiring films, documentaries, books, and podcasts that examine the psychology of evil and the anatomy of serial killing. These works walk a fine line, aiming to educate and explore without glorifying or exploiting tragedy. The fascination with Dahmer reflects a broader societal obsession with understanding the darkest facets of human nature and the mechanisms by which ordinary individuals can harbor unimaginable darkness. His case challenges viewers and readers to confront uncomfortable questions about morality, mental health, and the societal structures that enable violence to flourish. The legacy is complex, a mixture of cautionary tales, psychological inquiry, and ethical debates about representation and memory. In academic and forensic circles, Dahmer's crimes remain a critical case study. His methods, psychological profile, and the failures surrounding his detection provide invaluable lessons for criminal profiling, mental health interventions, and policing strategies. Researchers dissect the factors that contributed to his pathology, from childhood trauma and isolation to specific paraphilias and compulsions. The case underscores the necessity of early intervention and the importance of multidisciplinary approaches to preventing violence. At the same time, it highlights the limits of psychology in predicting human behavior, reminding practitioners that evil is often nuanced, complex, and deeply hidden. The social implications of the case extend into ongoing discussions about community vigilance, empathy, and justice. Dahmer's ability to evade capture was in part due to societal silence. The unwillingness to see or hear the marginalized, the failures to act on suspicions, and the discomfort with confronting taboo topics like sexuality and mental illness. In this light, his crimes serve as a somber call to recognize and respond to warning signs before they escalate. Communities are reminded that justice is not merely reactive but requires proactive awareness and compassion. Educational initiatives inspired by the case encourage open dialogue about abuse, mental health, and the power of human connection to prevent tragedy. Moreover, Dahmer's legacy touches on the ethics of storytelling and memory. Media portrayals grapple with honoring victims while exploring the criminal mind, a balance that is often difficult to achieve. The voices of those affected, families, survivors, communities, demand respect and agency in how stories are told. Public memorials, museum exhibits, and academic work strive to center remembrance over sensationalism, ensuring that the humanity lost is never forgotten amid the horror. The ongoing cultural conversation reflects a society attempting to learn from its darkest moments and to foster resilience in the face of trauma. In the years since Dahmer's death, the spaces associated with his crimes have transformed into sites of reflection and education. The former Oxford Apartments lot remains empty, a silent monument to the lives lost and the silence that enabled their demise. Milwaukee continues to honor the memories of the victims through vigils and community programs, turning pain into purpose. The city's response embodies a commitment to confronting past failures and building a future grounded in vigilance and empathy. Ultimately, the story of Jeffrey Dahmer is a complex tapestry of human failure and resilience. It forces a confrontation with uncomfortable truths about the capacity for evil, the limits of detection, and the importance of societal responsibility. His crimes, while uniquely horrifying, are also a mirror reflecting broader issues about who is seen, who is heard, and who is protected. The legacy he left is a challenge to the collective conscience, to remember, to learn, and to ensure that silence no longer serves as an accomplice to tragedy. The story of Jeffrey Dahmer is not merely one of a singular individual's descent into darkness, but a profound reflection on the fragility of human systems, the silence of society, and the haunting gaps where evil can take root unnoticed. As the years have passed since his arrest and death, the reverberations of his crimes continue to echo in law enforcement reforms, victim advocacy, psychological research, and the cultural consciousness. At its core, Dahmer's narrative challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths about loneliness, invisibility, and the devastating consequences when society's watchful eyes look away. He was a man who lived among us, smiled at us, and yet carried an abyss within, a quiet darkness that fed on silence and societal neglect. His victims, 17 young men whose lives were brutally extinguished, were often those who lived on the margins, isolated, overlooked, and vulnerable. Their disappearances underscored the peril of invisibility, where factors such as race, socioeconomic status, and sexuality intersected with systemic indifference to create conditions ripe for tragedy. The shock and horror elicited by the revelations of Dahmer's crimes were compounded by the recognition of missed opportunities and failures at multiple levels. Law enforcement's fragmented responses, the lack of coordinated investigation across jurisdictions, and the broader social stigmas that marginalized the victims collectively contributed to a landscape where one of the most chilling serial killers in history could operate for over a decade. The chilling efficiency with which Dahmer orchestrated his crimes was facilitated not only by his own calculated methods, but by a society reluctant to confront its uncomfortable realities, relying on stereotypes, overlooking signs, and dismissing the vulnerabilities of certain communities. In this way, Dahmer's story is as much about the invisible fractures in society as it is about the visible brutality of his acts. In the aftermath, profound questions arose about the nature of evil and the mechanisms of its concealment. Dahmer's case compelled a deeper exploration into the psychology of serial killers, not to sensationalize or justify, but to understand. His ability to compartmentalize, to mask his compulsions behind a facade of normalcy, challenged traditional notions of criminal behavior. Psychological experts debated the interplay of genetic predispositions, childhood trauma, and environmental factors that culminated in his pathology. Yet, even as science sought explanations, the essential horror remained: the calculated destruction of human life cloaked in silence and routine. This dissonance between appearance and reality forces society to reckon with the limits of perception and the complexities of human nature. Cultural reflections on Dahmer's legacy have been equally complex. His story has permeated media, inspiring films, documentaries, podcasts, and literature that strive to illuminate the darkest recesses of the human psyche while grappling with ethical boundaries. These portrayals have sparked important conversations about representation, the risk of glorification, and the imperative to honor victims with dignity. The enduring fascination with Dahmer's crimes reflects a collective desire to understand evil without falling into sensationalism. It also reveals a societal need to process trauma through storytelling, transforming horror into cautionary tales that illuminate rather than obscure. In this delicate balance, Dahmer's story serves as a mirror, reflecting society's fears, failures, and aspirations for justice. The spaces connected to Dahmer, the demolished Oxford apartments, the empty lot where apartment 213 once stood, remain silent testaments to the lives lost and the secrets kept. Milwaukee continues to grapple with this legacy, supporting memorials and initiatives aimed at remembrance and prevention. The community's resilience in the face of such darkness embodies a commitment to learning from the past and protecting the future. Educational programs, victim advocacy, and social reforms have all been, in part, responses to the profound lessons gleaned from the Dahmer case. These efforts underscore the ongoing need for vigilance, compassion, and systemic change to ensure that such horrors are neither repeated nor forgotten. Ultimately, the legacy of Jeffrey Dahmer serves as a stark reminder that evil often wears the mask of normalcy. It teaches that silence and invisibility can be as dangerous as violence itself. It calls on us to listen more closely to the unheard, to look beyond appearances, and to protect those most vulnerable among us. In remembering Dahmer and his victims, society confronts its own shadows, striving to transform pain into progress, fear into understanding, and tragedy into a lasting commitment to justice.